Well, guys, thanks for being here. Very excited to talk about the new album, Killing Horizon. I guess a week out from its release last week. It's been like as I've been listening, it's just been such a incredible experience, such a vast, intense record, which I love, and it's at times overwhelming, but then there's these kind of like really beautiful, kind of intimate, emotional moments. I've just found myself constantly drawn in and finding more layers and more meaning in the record. So congrats on such an amazing album. So I think it'd be cool. I know we kind of alluded to it a little bit in the when we were talking before, but could you guys kind of maybe talk about how you first became aware of each other's work or how you first connected?
Yeah. Just because you were talking about it earlier, Dom, and you're still in the Robert Wilson world. Yeah.
So we Brian and I met in, was it 2009, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Eight or nine.
So the Berliner Ensemble, which it was Bertolt Brecht's theater in Berlin.
Okay.
Yeah, and Robert Wilson, who's an American theater director and artist he kind of, his break was with Philip Glass, who did Einstein on the Beach in the 70s. So we were both working on a collaboration between Robert Wilson and Rufus Wainwright, and I was brought on as a guitar player. And Brian, and what was your title in there? I mean, you think all the arrangement, doing everything.
Yeah, I mean, technically, I was Rufus Wainwright's assistant for those years. We were working on his opera Prima Donna, and this project was kind of thrown in, and so yeah, I was essentially helping arrange his music and some of my own music when when there was room for additional music for this show. And and I have to say, even to this day, it remains one of the most impactful musical artistic experiences of my life. I mean, you can speak to this, Dom, but one of the things that I really remember about it was that on top of being with like an amazing acting troupe and at an amazing theater, the Bertolt Brecht Theater, which is where they premiered Three Penny Opera. So the setting was incredible. But Robert Wilson would have, I guess, like the whole staff show up at like 10, and we'd be there until like midnight or something. It was like kind of this insane, like a Bob Fosse production, like where, you these movies or these things you've seen in the 70s about like just people, being theater rats and kind of staying in a theater for like just a totally unreasonable amount of time. I mean, I think it's safe to say that he, broke any union regulations. I don't know if there is a union. Probably there is no union in Berlin, but that wouldn't fly in New York, that's for sure. So, but because of that, the production was just like absolutely incredible. I mean, it was just amazing.
Yeah, it sounds incredible. So, oh, go ahead. Sorry, Don.
No, I was going to say, like, just further to that, really. There was, I remember turning around because it takes a while to acclimatize to working with someone like Bob Wilson. It's like, and it took me about. I actually remember the moment it all changed because I was in the canteen with some string players, and Bryan came out. He kind of came into the canteen. He'd been in the auditorium. He was like, guys, you've got to come and see it. The first, like they call it a picture, like a bild or whatever in Germany, but the first kind of sort of set which is, it's a very particular thing with Bob. They're kind of like tableau, these
Okay.
things. So so Bryan had been in there, and he came running into the canteen. He's like, guys, you've got to come see it. The first picture's finished. So we all kind of sort of snuck in the darkness into, sort of silently at the back, so Bob wouldn't scream at us, and it was just incredible. And just suddenly it was just like, oh, this is what we're doing.
Yeah.
And then everything changed from that moment, because we were there for about 6 weeks in total, I think. It's like straight. And Bryan and I kind of, I think, fair to say, we kind of kept each other sane through that, like, kind of becoming friends, and kind of like, and
people were losing it.
They were losing it.
Yeah. Because
I remember,
working that much.
Yeah, it's a very intense experience.
Yeah, I turned around and saw one of the violin players, dots, like, and I just looked around. We were in the dots. We've been there for hours while something was being lit for 3 hours. You know, and I turned around and I saw this young violin, and she was just had streams of tears just running down her face. And she just looked at me, just like, yeah, like broken.
Wow.
Yeah, Rufus is the kind of guy who will spend like 2 hours on an actress going like this.
Easy.
Yeah, that's like, I feel like a different era of theater, and I mean, I'm sure experiences like that happen, but yeah, it's definitely.
Have you ever seen Stein on the Beach?
Oh, I've never seen it. I've heard it, but I haven't watched it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's the aesthetic.
Iconic. So you guys connected there. Is this kind of the first time you guys have directly collaborated on a specific project, or have you had other things you've been involved with since that project?
I think there's been bits and pieces, just like sort of like
Hold on, Dom has an amazing record that's been slept on and needs to be revisited. It's this band, Emperors of Rome. It's like really, oh shit. I feel bad that I didn't tell you about this, Daniel. You would love it.
Okay, yeah, I'll definitely.
Yeah, this is like, yeah.
So Bryan played, he played just some of his beautiful kind of violin on it, which was just, incredible. I remember you describing as what you were going for as being like bluegrass crossed with Arvo Pärt. And I was like spot on. Exactly what it is. You know what I mean? It was just like, whoa. So we had like little bits of stuff, and you played some violin on my radio piece, World War One.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, it was like a commission for a German radio station that I got commissioned to make it after working on a Wilson radio thing, and Bryan played violin on that as well. And that was, again, he just did the most heartbreaking one for the whole piece as usual.
Yeah.
Dom's the one bringing me, and I'm very grateful to Dom.
The thing is, he's a terrible scene stealer. You just put him on a track, and he's.
Nah, dude.
So I guess where did the initial conversation start for Killing Horizon then? So I mean, because you guys have been living with this for a little bit now, I guess. From where you start.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was really just sort of an idea because it was during lockdown, and the funny thing was like, I remember sort of thinking it was strange how the two people I was having the most to do with, who I was spending the most time with were Bryan and another friend, South Calhoun, both of whom were you were in LA, he was in New York. I thought, this is really weird. I'm actually, the only people I'm hanging out with are both, there. I'm not living around here. So I've seen more of them than anyone. So then, and then we were just chatting one night, and the idea just came up about why don't we do something? Why don't we make something? Nothing better to do. So but I mean, I'd wanted to do something substantial with Bryan for ages, but just like there's never time, and then suddenly there was time, and so it was like we should do it, and then he was like up for it, so it was just like, all right, let's do it.
Yeah. So was it kind of loosely organized in the beginning? Did you kind of have like a vision for where you wanted it to be, or was it kind of like a project you figure out as you go along?
Yeah, I mean, we just started, it was very loose. I feel like Dom, again, he's the one who kind of started the whole thing. I mean, he just sent, he would send like little bits of ideas that I would, essentially work on. And eventually I started, I started to contribute by also sending things back. But yeah, no, it was Dom's original, very interesting guitar parts, like straight from the beginning. And I think even after completion, they really do anchor the record. It's actually, to me, it's kind of, it's like the guitar is the focal point to which like everything else is kind of arranging around.
Yeah, it's funny because actually my perspective is more like I just kind of like had these scrappy little kind of bits of something which I sent over to Bryan, and then he just kind of like just built these incredible arrangements, and he sort of became the sort of de facto kind of producer of it because he was producing it, and it was just like, so there was nothing. It was never really kind of like oh, we do, you know, it was never like you do this or you do that or anything like that. It kind of just happened very naturally, you know. So
Yeah.
I would just send something that I thought, you know, could be interesting or whatever,
Yeah.
and then you know we had a Dropbox folder, and we would kind of meet once a week specifically to kind of talk about the record. But I mean, of course, we talked about loads of other stuff as well. But then we get onto that, and then we would sort of make a plan. But then you know, just as it went on, like I mean, I think Bryan was the one who really started to have like a yeah. I was just kind of doing what I do anyway, which is like a lot of kind of experimental guitar stuff. But Bryan was the one that sort of like started to really develop a kind of sonic vision and start to talk in terms of like, you know, imagining this kind of sort of scenario. I mean, he was talking about this being deep in these woods and things like that, and suddenly the whole thing started to become, you know, much more, you know, visual and kind of atmospheric and stuff. And that was very much Bryan's, you know, kind of vision, really. That, you know, just increasingly came out and got, you know, it's got more and more exciting, really.
Yeah, yeah. It kind of just accumulated more and more meaning and purpose probably as it went along.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, I don't think that part was as difficult because, you know, thinking of like a barren landscape or thinking about Cormac McCarthy's The Road, you know, in
See, he's doing it again.
This is
the thing, yeah.
Yeah. But it was like June of 2020, you know. So it wasn't, you know, I feel like I was kind of fed that topic. And, you know, at the time too, I had started working on Manu, you know, another record of mine, and which was like had a very specific like past focus thing going on, or like ancestral thing going on. And this record was like, this became the journal of the time. Like I was able to delude myself with Manu, and then, you know, our friendship and our ability to talk became like the therapy of like dealing with the trauma of the event. And so, and it also was kind of, you know, in a way, it was a little bit, it became like indulgent too, because we were able to do kind of this dark, moody music, not without concepts, not without like depth, but still like dark, moody, kind of cinematic stuff that you felt like you were given permission to do it because we were going through a dark, moody, cinematic moment historically. So, and that like was awesome to do.
Yeah. Especially the first few months of lockdown, I know so much has been said about that time. We don't need to go way into that, but I do find that a lot of artists in particular return to this place of creating without, like so many of us are so bound by projects, or I guess for Dom, like commissions and different things. And it kind of opened up this window to do something for ourselves in a lot of ways. I think I found that artists that it was strangely freeing, or like a way to push back on the abyss of what is going on right now, just the unknown, the kind of like the intense trauma of that event. And
yeah,
listening to the record, and knowing the context of where it started, at least it almost feels like, as I was making notes about it, it was like, it kind of feels like the soundtrack to a lost film or something. But it's like it's really a soundtrack to that, especially that initial period, I think, that we were all going through. It's like it just has that depth and that just that unspeakable place that music can access, you know. And
I think because it's not a film score, but it sounds like it could be a film score in a way, or in many ways, we were allowed to like take concepts to like their complete end. You know, this isn't like interstitial music that just like abruptly ends like a cue. You know, like a track like The Ground, for example, it goes like all the way there. You know, it completely unravels, and then is completely like reformed and emulsified, and then ends in like in a completely different space, also with guitar. But you know, we wouldn't, you know, if that was something that was like appearing in you know, Lars von Trier film or some other, or Thriller or something, you wouldn't be able to go there completely. And I think that's one of the nice things about this particular record, you know, that's able to go like one level deeper.
Yeah, you're not by a scene or by another outside.
Yeah. it's truly a soundtrack of pandemic.
I mean,
Something I think about that too, which like I'm really, I have to say thank you to Naive, because initially when I told them about this record, they're like, you can't do that. We're not releasing a pandemic record.
Right.
Or you have to say it's not a pandemic record. And I was like, yeah, but it's a pandemic record. And it took them 2 years to agree to release it, but they eventually did. So
it was so a pandemic.
I
mean, it really was like a therapy process. I mean,
Yeah.
it was like, even now I can, I was living in a different apartment at the time, and I can just recall sitting at the desk over there, chatting to Bryan, like November, this sort of time of year or whatever. It's dark, and we were just talking about that. We're doing a record, and it was just like a lifeline to be able to kind of work on something like that. And I think sometimes when you, like, always find the idea of kind of, sort of expression or things like that is a bit weird, when it's like, what's that mean? How do ideas come out in sound, or they coming out in music? But I think with a project like that, it just sort of, listening back to it and thinking, yeah, that makes sense. It's that you can't say exactly how one thing turns into another thing, why it does, but it definitely resonates at that, when you think back to the mood of the time and then the music we made there. It's like, yeah, it is connected. It's like, the music is of that time, that place, whatever. And the other thing is, like, I think one thing I really love about the record is that, I suppose it's partly because it's a collaboration, but often when I listen, even to music that I've done, which was from a long time ago, and maybe something didn't get finished, it could even be just like an improvisation stuff, I always kind of know what's going to happen next. It's like I can't trick myself with it. With this record, I never remember what's going to happen. Every time I listen to it, it goes somewhere. I'm like, oh, I didn't remember that it kind of went. It just does this kind of, takes this turn.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about that because I know you mentioned that you started with just sharing fragments and stuff, and like what that experience was like. You get a fresh session and not knowing what the other person had done. Like, were there kind of just like a lot of surprises, or like what was that kind of experience like? Kind of, it's almost like a game of telephone with music, where you're just kind of, you have no idea what's going to come out of the speakers when you hit play that first time.
Yeah. Well,
I have to say, every single time I got something from Dom, I was like, damn, Dom's good. Because
mutual.
I also, guitar is like one of those hard instruments too, because you kind of like, I feel it's like, it's almost like piano or something like that, where it's like, sometimes you can get a lot of expected stuff. Dom stuff was never expected, like for example, for me, like, two of my favorite tracks on the record, again, are guitar focused, Rain and Circle. And what struck me about those things, and I was mentioning this to Dom before this talk, but they're all kind of like random played. And I feel like whenever, 9 out of 10 guitarists who are going to approach a concept like that, particularly in a track like Circle, particularly in a track that's like, it's metered in some, it's like, it's falling along, like Rain is completely off the grid, like Circle is on a grid. I feel like 9 out of 10 guitarists would probably have like randomized that in a pedal or something like that, but it's all, he's playing all this stuff randomly in, and because of that, it's got this weird, I know that's like how people used to do. People used to just play random live, but for some reason, like hearing that part, there's something just so strange about it. It's that it's like actually played randomly live. And then I think, jumping off of that, like as a concept, I was pitch shifting it into different pitch centers. And I did that like one channel at a time with this Marantz. Well, first I like bounced his thing to tape. And then with the Marantz PMD 222 cassette tape would warp it, just by hand. But I think that whole thing, about doing things by hand, again, is stemming from the guitar performance itself, and just how peculiar it is that like this randomization of the world, which on one level, you could argue is computer, the computers are like randomizing our world or whatever. But the fact that we can do this to ourselves, the concept that like humans can also create this kind of chaos, to me was something that resonated and for me was like a motif of the time, that like this chaos is actually handmade and on some level.
Yeah, representative. So, I mean, that's what I was struck too by. Like, obviously, you guys on.
And you're a guitar player. Jail's a guitar player. So.
Not in this circle, would not advertise my guitar playing. But, Bryan, traditional violin, strings, dom, guitar, I know. But, like, what I was struck by was, like, they are rarely used in obvious ways, or, like, more, like, expected ways on this album. And maybe this is a good time we could talk about maybe some of the more gear tech side of stuff. Like for you, Dom, how are you kind of approaching creating these vast kind of expansive sounds? I mean, I know reverb probably played a role at some point, but anything you can share about like your the gear you're using, or like how you kind of approached these sounds?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually not like it's actually not nothing that kind of clever, really. It's like, I mean, there's like, in fact, hold on, I've got some of these in front of me. I mean, it was really things like something like that, like a freeze pedal. So for kind of like sort of sound capture, I was using things like that pitch shifter kind of pedal.
Classic.
Yeah. Classic, yeah. And then volume pedal. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the time it would be doing something like using a volume pedal and then going, say, into reverse reverb, followed by a really massive, like, right way round reverb afterwards. Yeah. Like we used a lot of Valhalla on Bryan's suggestion, so I kind of ended up getting that because. And then what else apart from that? I mean, then a lot of it really was just down to preparing the guitar, So I mean, I do a lot of kind of just random detuning on the guitar, and then I might use like knives sometimes to make sounds, metal chopsticks, things stuck between the strings, kind of like dropping things, making it resonate on the string. So it's very kind of, I mean, EBO sometimes as well, but I mean, a lot of it is just hex bugs as well. Actually, the little vibrating kind of toys. So just really, I mean, because I do quite a lot of like live improvisation and whatnot. So they're just kind of tools I've just ended up, that I kind of like what they do, and I find they tend to be quite, kind of quite flexible sort of workhorses for kind of experimenting and whatnot. So it was really just that stuff, I just find an interesting position on the pitch pedal or something. I mean, something like, is it rain? Dun, 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 dun. There's the like where it kind of. I mean, could you remember we tried to redo that at one point?
Yeah.
It was impossible. It just like it was just this improvised thing, just a kind of arpeggio, just kind of playing around some notes in a chord and whatnot. But it was all kind of detuned. It was a bit out of tune and whatnot. Yeah. And then for some reason, I can't remember what it was exactly, but we were going to try and redo it. Like Bryan was like, can you try and do another pass of it? And I tried and it's just like, there was just no way. It it wasn't going to happen again.
Yeah. It's like often the way it is, the first thought is the best thought. Like that.
Yeah, totally. And that, I mean, that's the thing with this record. It's like very much kind of based on very kind of just instinctive moments, so something would just be, either me or Bryan would kind of improvise something. And so, I mean, it's a mix, so it's a mixture of the very, very immediate, very, very fast, and then the incredibly kind of like sculpted as well. But, but I mean, Bryan was taking these kind of very spontaneous moments and then adding other spontaneous moments to it. But then also but then also, I mean, he was very kind of insistent we didn't kind of straighten things out. We kept this kind of really organic kind of, sort of unpredictability or flow or kind of natural thing. And and it was really important that he was kind of so insistent on us, not because sometimes you change your answers, don't you? It's not
Right.
you feel there's an expectation to do something. So I would like do something very sort of instinctive, but then maybe kind of put a pressure on myself that maybe I should be looking at this differently. But then Bryan was like, no, we've got to, this is what we're doing. This should be have this kind of flowing kind of, it's like something coming out of the ether in a way,
Yeah.
And that was really important to keep that kind of focus on it.
Yeah, like keeping. I imagine it's challenging with a project like this to know when to stop or like not to over edit or like to kind of like leave things kind of like not kill the initial idea or spirit of something, So
Right.
when you have these improvisations, like how do you know when something's done? Like how did you get to the point where you had these individual songs that you could kind of build an album around?
I just think, at least for me and maybe in the producer seat, it's just every track like had like a specific thing that it was intending to achieve. And at least for me, I felt like very clear about like what each track was gonna do. And again, to Dom's like credit, like I think, oftentimes it would start with the guitar, and I like, even if we tried to like redo it, it wasn't gonna happen. And but for me, like for example, with the track like Rain again, for me it just felt like little bombs like dropping off like in the distance, like some sort of like acid rain in the distance. And so I knew that his part, I was just gonna like go in there and like essentially like automate like reverb with every single different note that he was touching. And maybe I zhuzhed things around just a little bit, but like it was really just about creating this kind of like just wild audio scape where like everything was like in a different place. But it all stemmed from this like completely improvised guitar part. And I think that's kind of, again, to me, that's like part of what makes these tracks kind of like surprising. I think maybe a sister track to that would be Elevation. He had done this like wild strummed to, I don't even know what pedals he used, strummed to like attacked chords that also felt like bombs dropping off from a distance. And then for me, I was like, well, let's let me kind of whereas Rain perhaps was like on the ground, like somebody experiencing them on the ground, like Elevation for me was like, let's give the sensation that we're like in a plane, kind of, with that kind of emotional distance, dropping off bombs like B-roll from World War II. And so I essentially like arranged this experience around that guitar part, which I think was left almost as is. I think I edited maybe the ending just to like give us some structure. I had like, there was a break where like a cello part, this emotional cello part comes in, which you kind of alluded to stuff like that, Daniel, at the beginning of our talk. But like, there's these moments of like emotionality, but then when it comes back in, it comes back in as is. And yeah, so anyway, the point is that like every single track kind of like had that kind of like narrative focus.
Yeah, it's cool you bring up Elevation, because I was thinking about that track in particular, because I feel like on one of my first initial listens, the palette and the landscape of the album is so big, it's so easy to get lost in. And then I feel like there might be an earlier moment with guitar, Dom, but like, and I think it's like halfway through Elevation, there's kind of like a little piano motif.
Yeah.
It's almost like, dare I say, a little bit uplifting or happy, kind of.
Yeah.
Guitar coming on, but it kind of like, that was the first time I felt like I was on a journey, or almost, it felt like it put a chronological framework almost for me as a listener on the album of like, I was like, oh, we've been in this very dark, vast place, and then that kind of pokes through a little bit, and then I feel like the album kind of matches the title of the song. You do feel like you're kind of rising above something, or kind of coming dark, very unknowable place in a sense.
Yeah.
It made me think of there's a Gavin Bryars piece, The Sinking of the Titanic, where it's
Oh,
kind of like, you know, there's these like normal traditional things happening, but then these weird, it's almost like it's taking a very, I don't know, like a more traditional piece and almost like drowning it in like
yeah.
an emotional postmodern kind of, for lack of a better word, like kind of experience, like layering realities on top of each other.
100%.
And I just like it's like it really struck me as like I know this is reaching, but it's like, is this kind of like a concept record, or is there like kind of a narrative arc that was kind of in place when you guys were kind of laying out the track listing,
Um,
or was
I
it more intuitive, like what songs felt good next to each other?
Yeah, I think there is kind of like a narrative arc. I mean, you know, and it is kind of, yeah, for lack of sounding indulgent, it is kind of this post-apocalyptic landscape, you know. Drift to me, like when I think of Drift, I think, you know, I think it's like somebody like getting on the radio, like kind of like a Cormac McCarthy, you know, in the book, like, you know, and there's no one on the other end, you know, and then the ground is the beginning, perhaps, of like a war, and you know, rain is, you know, again, some sort of like an Ancient Orange kind of like nuclear landscape. I mean, Cathedral for me feels like a nuclear bomb going off with this second half of it. It was nice to like essentially sound design that again with like with Dom's like crazy, insane guitar chords, which I feel, you know, again, anchor that experience. And yeah, so you're essentially going through this like very dark end of days thing, and then Mirage, which is like the most major
Right.
you know, sounding piece of the whole record, is just kind of like a sweet memory of something from the past that like no longer exists. So for me, Mirage always felt like an epilogue. I don't know how you feel about it, Dom.
Well, I was going to say that I think it's the, you know, it's, I mean, in any kind of situation, like just being a little bit literal about it, I suppose you'd have that kind of tension between, even in a terrible situation, there's also that kind of element of hope as well. So I think in a record you know, one of the reasons, you know, maybe it works is also because it's not just like, it's just not uniformly dark and desolate. You know, it's not that
Right.
the whole thing is just like one dystopian nightmare. It has, I mean, even if those moments of lightness of falling asleep, dreaming something nice and waking up, you're like, oh fuck, it's still here. You know, but but you know what I mean, though. But you need to have both of those things. Otherwise, it's that. I mean, no one's you know, it's yeah. I mean, you have to have. Yeah, there have to be shards of light kind of running through it, even if it's, you know, it's like if you ever seen one of those incredible skies like in Tuscany, you know, in Italy, where you know, when you drive through that kind of centre of Italy and you look at these skies and you realise from when you saw old masters, you know, paintings and whatnot, you're like, oh shit, those skies are real. They are. Do actually look like that. Yeah, you know. So it's like that. You know, big kind of swirling clouds, but you've got kind of yeah. I think it's that. I don't know. I'm still, to be honest, I'm still processing the record. It's kind of like now we've got a little bit of distance with it, and I think psychologically, when it actually comes out and you realise the album is out and it's there, and to be able to kind of now I'm kind of listening to it more as someone listening to a record.
Yeah, it becomes a little more objective, probably, or like you have a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, there was quite a while where I didn't listen to it because I felt it was just sort of, I don't know, it just wasn't. It wasn't time to kind of go back and kind of and really kind of visit. And now I'm really enjoying listening to it, and you know, I feel like I'm kind of discovering it. There's so many, you know, aspects to it, and it was like a really. So I'm going off on a little bit of one here, but I was just going to say it was like actually a real learning experience for me as well, because there's a lot of things that, you know, Bryan kind of brought into it that were not the sort of things I kind of had really kind of given much thought to before. Like, I mean, he was just, one of them was just this kind of, you know, he was sort of introduced me to sort of you know, kind of interesting ways of approaching chords, you know, and it was like, you know, and harmony and stuff like that is something which kind of like, with me, it's kind of something that happens to other people, whereas I'm doing all these kind of making all these weird noises.
We did talk about theory for a little bit.
You were?
We did talk about theory for a little bit.
Yeah, so he kind of, he was kind of bringing stuff in there where it was like, where I was thinking, oh shit, this is really, this is a really interesting place to go, to kind of like start thinking about and how to kind of construct chords and layering notes together and stuff. So yeah, that was really interesting for me.
So yeah, I know you mentioned like the road and Melancholia, and I know there was a lot of conversations too on top of the creative side of things. Like, how much did that influence, or like, can you share a light on like kind of some of the maybe non-musical elements that I know we touched on a few already, but besides those films maybe, or different theories, and obviously the title of the album being Killing Horizon, which I associate with like, science, physics, black holes, that sort of thing, and how the non-musical side kind of overlays on top of the art here.
Well, I mean, Killing Horizon, definitely, a term borrowed from black holes. Also, just like a very easy metaphor for, for lack of a future. So I feel like that was a fun phrase to stumble upon. In an event horizon like light can't escape. I'm definitely not an authority to be able to talk about this kind of stuff, but it's fun to think about. And even though killing is like, it got its name from like the scientist. This is like Wilhelm.
Yeah, when I was like, man, that is a very apt title, but then realizing it was the scientist's last name too.
Yeah, it's the scientist's last name. So that just ended up being convenient. He probably knew that was going to be borrowed at some point for literature, So, but yeah, no, I think in terms of other concepts, in the ground, for example, we talked about it with rain. I think with the ground, like just thinking of like a nefarious pathology and like how that just like unwinds. Like one step at a time is something that's like really, that became interesting. And that piano part riffing off of Dom's ideas was like completely improvised. Like the piano part is one performance, one take the whole way through. Which was, it was fun to work in that kind of a format. So that, that really helped. Obviously the nuclear bomb thing with the, just the anticipation of that. That's kind of like a riff off of Melancholia. I love that movie. I'm like a huge Lars super fan of Lars, and know all of his stuff. So yeah, like, and I think with that particular piece too, is also like, well, I forget the name of the track, but it's like a Winged Victory track that kind of, so that's a shout out to Dustin, Adam, but which kind of begins with that kind of like, just like repeating chord idea. So that became important, but when you get to the middle of Cathedral, like there's this moment that just feels like, the birds are like, stop chirping, like you're in the middle of an eclipse. And so like musically painting those kinds of moments became really, really fun. But yeah, I know, I think it's, pretty much Melancholia, black holes, World War II, the virus, the pathology, those kinds of things were like anchoring conceptually the record in each different track.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, so I know when you finished the record, you mixed with Francesco.
Yeah.
And in I've never worked with him directly, but with friends who have, I understand that he can be kind of hands-on and likes to get more than some.
He definitely, yeah.
Yeah, I was curious, like how much the album changed from what you sent him versus the mixes, or like what that process was like.
I'll say in this particular one, like it didn't change that much, and I think he told me that he liked where it was. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that he changed more aggressively probably was the end of Circle, like the string sound or something. But but everything was like more him like just making sure, because there were so many different tracks. You know, I
I
don't.
think there was an element, I think, of like, you know, perhaps what after Francesco worked on this, you know, certain sounds you would hear movement or something like that, maybe
Yeah.
you know, additional movement there. But I mean, Bryan did such a huge amount of work on the production
Yeah.
anyway beforehand. I mean, you know,
I think,
so
yeah.
much going on. You know,
I spent about like 2 months full time with my assistant producing it.
So you were doing a lot in the box then after you kind of had these
Well, this is, yeah, no, I mean, certainly in the box, but a lot of it was like I use I use that like this record. I use every piece of gear in my arsenal, everything, you know, from a bunch of shit I've sold, but like, you know, like from like DW Fern EQs and you know, and kind of like pro audio Pultex and just kind of like just experimenting, running it in and just like slamming like every, you know, just like totally missing all the knobs like in just intense ways to I tortured my assistant on it. I tortured Eric. Thank you, Eric. By like having him, like for example, with like just the space echo, just like, you know, one channel at a time, like the whole track down, just like wiggle the knob, just like wiggle that and give a little bit of space echo to left channel and right channel. And I think you hear, like if you pay attention to like details, like in a track like Mirage, there's like a Wemcat like 1960s tape echo, there's the space echo, there's other tape stuff in there. There's the cassette, you know, for the PMD, you know, PMD 222. And then there's a bunch of like outboard stuff from like Game Changer Audio Plasma Rack to a Retro Lab 18-volt thing, you know, distortion unit to, I mean, just all this like stuff, all entered one track at a time, one track at a time, one track at a time, and left and right separately.
Yeah.
I mean, also, like say with the guitars, we kind of reamp them. So, like for instance, something like Cathedral, those massive guitars are actually getting reamped through like an SBT2, like a huge, like, you know, 8x10 bass rig, you know. So it's like, so you know, we were really kind of putting things out into real rooms, micing them up, putting it. So it's not, you know, it's not a laptop production.
Yeah.
It's very much.
Yeah.
It's kind of a real thing.
It takes a lot. It takes a hi-fi studio to make shit sound this this dirty. Yeah.
Like, and then hearing how you guys made the record, that it doesn't, like, there's some records that they don't feel like they were recorded in a particular, it just feels like they just kind of spontaneously exist in some of their own universe somehow, or like I don't think of like it's like this cohesive mass of audio, and as a compliment, and it's just like I don't think about like, think about someone playing the piano in the studio or miking a guitar amp or anything like that. It becomes this other thing that's almost and it's alive, and I feel like that's a testament to the layers and how much work in the little details, and like you're saying, splitting left and right out and adding these artifacts and adding these kind of like just human things that analog gear does, and it just like it accumulates into this thing that just becomes almost just like it exists unto itself or something, you know.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is like from I mean, yeah, I suppose like mixture of the approach is probably how things were created initially and how they were produced as well. Yeah, it kind of gets into the sort of acousmatic world where you don't really know what that is or what's making that sound.
Yeah,
it's just this thing. And I was listening to it earlier today, and there's all these kind of amazing little kind of artifacts which are coming from, like, I have no idea where they're coming from, but they're there, you know. And it's like wow, they sound like, yeah, it sounds like, you know, like leaves going between dimensions or something, you know, like from the analog to the digital to the analog. And And that was, I think, was a big thing that was going on here. Things like sound sources were passing through these different kind of processes, and like they might go, they would go from the acoustic to the digital, then back out into the acoustic, and then they were worldized, and then they were back in, and they were passing through all these kind of like different moments and spaces. And I think that's one of the things which maybe gives it some of the depth that it has.
Yeah.
I talked to Francesca about this kind of stuff a lot. And, his standpoint is that, like, unfortunately, when he gets like sometimes he gets records that are all recorded in the studio with the same mic and the same machine, with just the same reverb. And it requires a lot of work to like make that record feel like it's done, he has to go in and post-process a lot of stuff because there's something about, just some sort of distortion, some sort of dirtiness, some sort of like juxtaposition of different spaces and different miking things that lend to the ear the sense of like, oh, it's complete and finished. And, we don't know what that is. It's just a je ne sais quoi kind of thing about what makes a record and what makes a track feel like it's finished. But in this particular experiment, like everything went through so much like stuff. That and again, I think to Dom's point too, there's like errors in like when you're like queuing up tape and cutting up tape and like even with the cassette. I mean, I remember like with the cassette stuff that we were doing, I would pass stuff in through the cassette and it would be maybe it didn't hit the tape like hot enough or something like that, and we were like, then I'd be like, we would just like keep using that tape, particularly in a track like Circle. And then there's all these ghosts.
Yeah.
All this ghosting of notes and vibes that are in the tape. Yeah. You just can't, you can't recreate that. And it's like, oh, this is like the Circle tape. And like when those low notes come in, that are like, they're almost kind of spooky notes. It was just Halloween, so I think about that track, but like these spooky little low notes, there's so much ghosting of what's happening above that it feels like they like glow when they come in. That stuff is just like fun production trickery when you're dealing with, and when you have time, because like it was the pandemic.
It is
Eric just
I mean, I was thinking, what is it? Is it the ground? I think where it flips around and it gets reversed, like like from halfway through. So you basically have this kind of mirror that happens. So you've got the Brian's piano part, which kind of runs up to here, and then at some point the whole thing goes, and it kind of goes out in reverse. And I feel like there was a lot of when you were talking about the ghosting and stuff like that. That makes me think of like if you're drawing like with charcoal or doing something like that, and you make corrections and there's things which are still there on the paper and whatnot. And it felt like a lot of the processing in this were kind of almost seemed like analogous, or even like maybe closer in some respects to how you imagine working, say, in a visual format or something, rather than like a lot of the kind of sort of normal kind of musical approaches. I mean, we've both written like rock, pop music or whatever, and obviously we're familiar with how you might do that, but it's like, but this wasn't that. This sort of thing of kind of like actually really kind of treasuring these kind of strange little artifacts and things, kind of ghost images and things like almost like they're bits of kind of plastic with an imprint on them, like a slide on top of another slide. It very much felt like that kind of process, and the fact that it wasn't we didn't have to not do that because it had to fit in with something else. There was this and that's I think where Bryan went massively with this was to kind of it was something which didn't have to follow any kind of rules, and then Bryan he was just like charging ahead with it. It's just like, no, I mean, going to like really fanatical lengths to get stuff done there, where I was like, really? And it's breaking things into tiny bits and processing them manually,
right,
with whipping his assistant.
I would go upstairs and just have dinner and be like, just do it again. Do the whole track over again. But yeah, so it was fun.
Yeah, that intention really comes through. And it's like, yeah, it's like with each listen, I'm hearing new things. Like you're saying, Dom, like these artifacts are like, oh, I don't remember where that came from for you as the creators. But like, it just really, I think because of how much time and how much work you put towards giving it a life of its own, or like giving it these imperfections, I think it's a collection of music that is just almost regenerative and constantly every time you come back to it, it's like a fresh listen. So
Yeah.
it's a beautiful work, and I'm very glad that it's out in the world and I get to listen to it.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's it.
So what do you guys, what's next on the horizon, for lack of a better word, for you guys?
I'm finishing mixing the Manu follow-up, so that's happening right now. I'm excited about that, but I'm really pumped to do, next record with them when we're able to, now that we're both in Europe. So yeah, so we'll see when that happens. But he's busy, working with Bob Wilson.
Back in the theater world.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really do. I mean, I've done quite a lot of dance and stuff like that, and I have done bits of theatre, but I kind of wasn't really doing so much of that lately. So this kind of came out of the blue, doing another, Bob Wilson production. But I'm kind of like, it's what they call interdisciplinary artist now. So I kind of do a lot of visual and other things, So so I've got a lot of kind of more like art world projects going on, and also a kind of opera type thing. So like, I don't know.
I'm excited to hear that.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to call it.
Yeah.
So that, and then definitely, just can't wait for us to kind of get on with the second record. Really, I think. It's
where it goes next.
Totally. Yeah, we definitely have to do the next one.
Yeah.
As Bryan says, he's in Europe, so that's makes life a lot.
Yeah, make it a lot easier to make it happen.
Yeah, well, hopefully we can actually get in a room. Rather than me.
It'd be interesting to see how the working, if the sound shifts at all with you guys working in the same room together.
Yeah, I think it would be I think that's going to be a really exciting thing, actually, because I mean the one thing we couldn't do with this was kind of jam. Basically, we couldn't just get in there and kind of play something. So that would be like a really significant difference that we are able to do that, and I think that will be really, really exciting. That'll be really powerful because we know that we can play together. And we so it's like that's not really even a question. It's like I think I'm really excited to do that. It's that kind of power of just doing it. At the same time, in the same room, in the same space, I think will be amazing.
Yeah, we just got to find with a lot of care.
Yeah.
We'll figure it out.
Thanks for sharing so much about the record.
Thank you.
And this is a real joy for me to talk to you guys today. And
likewise.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, man. Thanks for taking the time.